As always, welcome to Virtual Cafe Oleh.
It sounds something a bit fun
And
as well.
this class, for those of you who are brand new, is
Unless you
meant
just
to,
switch everybody on.
first off, if everyone can mute themselves, that would be great. Just because we have a lot of people on the call today, which is awesome.
You are muted, only your microphone, press and hold the space key.
Okay, can everyone please mute? Thanks. So as always, this class is really meant to go into practical Hebrew that you can use and you should be using on an everyday basis, not necessarily the Hebrew that you are or not learning in Ulpan or wherever else you're learning. And really to answer your questions along the way. As always, if you have questions while I'm sharing today's lesson, feel free to use the chat window. I will stop at a certain point. You can ask any questions you want, again, in the chat window. If it's too hard to chat, you can unmute yourself and ask a question about what I'm presenting today or anything else. And so today's lesson comes from you. As always, we offer or extend offer to all of you. If you have specific questions about Hebrew that you'd like us to cover, we do so in this class. And today we had a request to go over one of the words in Hebrew for the word because, or for those of you who like the word because, I end up saying both of them, even though I didn't grow up saying that. So what we're going to do today is go over the word because. In Hebrew, there's actually multiple words that all mean because. Some of these you probably know, some of these you probably don't. One of which is probably the fanciest version. Any of you who've ever lived in Israel and rented an apartment, you know this word automatically without even knowing what it meant. So even talking about a word that we use all the time, because we're also gonna go through some legalese Hebrew together that I never thought you probably ever have to learn, but you use all the time. So again, if you have any questions while I'm talking, please use the chat window. Please mute your microphones in the meantime. And I'm gonna share my screen with you. And as always, you feel free to screenshot this down as I'm writing. Also remember, Nefesh B'Nefesh records these meetings, so if you want the recording to go over these words again and what we cover, be in touch with them directly. Okay, so today we're talking about because. Because as a word is, as we say in English, is a conjunction. Now, I'm going to not talk too much grammar, although it is important. A conjunction is putting two parts of a sentence together. It can be two words, like and or. It can be two parts of a sentence. And that's what we're talking about today, two parts of a sentence, which normally are called a clause. Again, I don't want to freak you out over grammar, so I'm going to keep this really basic. But when we talk about sentences that have the word because, we're usually talking about two parts of a sentence that are brought together. It's cause and effect or a reason, something happens because something, right? And that something can either be what we call in grammar a dependent clause or an independent clause. Don't get freaked out by that. I show you on the right-hand side of this screen what I'm talking about here. It's really simple. Dependent clause. A dependent clause is a clause that is not a sentence. It's a thought, it's a word, it's a combination of words, but it doesn't form a complete sentence, meaning it has to be part of something else in order to be considered its own sentence. Whereas an independent clause is a complete sentence on its own. Let me give you an illustration. This is in English, this is in Hebrew, this is in many languages that the rest of you speak. A dependent clause would be hageshem. Okay, as you see here, column H, hageshem. Hageshem simply means the rain or rain. Hageshem on its own is a dependent clause. If I wanted to say, I am taking an umbrella with me because of the rain is a dependent clause, right? If I just wrote out, I'm taking an umbrella because of the rain, if I were to split that sentence, the rain is not a complete sentence, right? I'm sure you can all agree with me on that, in English as well. Same as in Hebrew, it is not a complete sentence to just say hageshem. Okay, same thing. As opposed to hageshem yoled. Hageshem yoled, it's raining. It is raining. Literally, the rain is falling, or the rain falls. But in Everyday English, it's raining. So if I were to say, I'm taking an umbrella today because it is raining, it is raining is a complete sentence. It's not the best sentence. It's not going to win a Pulitzer Prize, but it's a full sentence. Same thing in Hebrew. Hageshem Yoled, or sometimes Yoled Hageshem, is a complete sentence. I can put a period at the end of that and I'm done. It's a complete thought, complete sentence. So it's important to know that what is a dependent clause, what is an independent clause. And if that's complicated while we're going through all the different words for because, just simply look to your right again on the screen. Hageshem, Hageshem Yoled. One is a dependent clause, one is independent. Dependent, Hageshem has to be part of a sentence, otherwise it's just a word. Hageshem Yoled does not. It's its own sentence, okay? So with that, let's start talking about the word because we need to know what's that second part of the sentence after because, right? Is it dependent or is it independent, and what happens in Hebrew? So first off, probably the word that most, if not all of you know for the word because in Hebrew is, as you see here in row E, column E, column E, row 2 is key. Okay, key is always taught as because. When we went through media literacy a few weeks ago, we talked about it can also mean that, but for our purposes today, it means because. All of the words that you see in this list mean because. Okay, so as you'll see, I did not write the word because except in the title sheet because all of them get translated as because. You can be fancy if you want and say due to or because of, and we're going to get to because of in a bit, but all these get translated as because. Key is the most widely used. Key is found in the Bible, it's found in rabbinic literature, we use it to this day. And as you see here, as you read this chart as we go through it together, right? Starting from the right and going to the left. The word is key in Hebrew, transliterated as I wrote here for English speakers. And then you see here, before a dependent clause or independent clause. So as you see, I blacked it out. In other words, key has to be followed by an independent clause. So you cannot say in Hebrew, Ani lokech et hamitria, I am taking my umbrella, ki hageshem. You may not say that. You have to say, Ani lokech et hamitria, ki hageshem yored. Okay? So it has to be followed, ki must be followed by an independent clause. Okay? That's why it's blacked out. If it's blacked out, it means it is not used as such. Key has to be followed by an independent clause. And as I wrote here, these independent clauses are usually followed by some sort of further conjunction. In this case, key does not, right? Ki hageshem yoled, because it's raining. That's it. No she, no bin, no ve, no nothing else. Just straight to what we're talking about here, the reason why. Okay, key is the easiest one of all of these to use. The only thing you have to remember is that key must be followed by what we call an independent clause. It must be followed by a fully formed sentence that is part of this explanation of why I'm doing something. Okay? And the last column on the left is formal or informal. Like I alluded to, one of the words we're going to get to is very legalese Hebrew, or it's used in legalese today. Some of these are very formal, some of these are less formal. So if you want to know which context to use them, and context is very important in Israel, right? There are certain people you're going to use some of these words for and it's appropriate, and some it's not. Just like any modern language, there are certain words that you're going to sound out of touch with your audience if you use some more than others. In this case, key is great for formal and informal. What do I mean by that? We've talked about this before. Informal is your friends, is your neighbor, is family, significant other. Formal is your boss. Formal is a person who's older. Formal is anything business or someone of a different stature than you, usually higher. Informal is everyone else. Key can be used in both. If I'm trying to say something that's in a formal context or an informal context, key will always be there for me. Okay? Moving on to the next one. A lot of these, again, all of them mean because. They're just used slightly different from one to another. The next one. Now, this one, I'm probably going to get a lot of flack. If not from you, I'm going to get flack from your Hebrew teachers, and for good cause. Mipnei. Mipnei is one of the words, one of two words you're going to hear a lot that mean because. And as you see here, mipnei is used before both a dependent clause and an independent clause. And when it's an independent clause, it's followed by she. You've heard this all the time, and you've probably used this all the time. Mipnei she. Ani shote mayim. I'm drinking water. Mipnei she'ani tzameh. I'm drinking water because I am thirsty. Tzameh means thirsty. I'm drinking water because I'm thirsty. That is a perfectly all right sentence. Now, that is in contrast to the next word here, biglal. Biglal is the exact same word. It's the exact same meaning. Use it as you see in this table, you use it the exact same way, right? Mipnei she is the exact same thing as biglal she. Ani shote mayim, biglal she'ani tzameh. Ani shote mayim, mipnei she'ani tzameh. They are the exact same thing. Here's the difference though, and this is important. The reason why, at least I think, a lot of your Hebrew teachers, and the reason why I say yours, because I hear many, many, many olim say mipnei she all the time. Mipnei she in modern Hebrew is very formal. It's a little too formal. It's a little stodgy. It is, the reason why we use it is because we have a precedent for saying mipnei she in older Hebrew texts. And one of the things that the Academy for the Hebrew Language, which is the authority for creating and standardizing modern Hebrew, one of the ways it standardizes Hebrew is it looks at precedent. It looks at what sources do we have of this in existing Hebrew literature, Tanakh, Talmud, medieval literature, and so forth. Mipnei she, as a construct, exists. Biglal she didn't. We had plenty of examples of biglal, followed by an independent clause, but not biglal she. The consequences of modern Hebrew and people using a living language, biglal she is not only heard all the time, I hear it a lot more often than mipnei she, and in both informal and formal contexts. So much so that the Academy, even though it says that there is no precedent for biglal she, except in the very recent period, they've decided not to rule on this. They have said that both biglal she and biglal are perfectly all right. But a lot of olim learn mipnei she. And when you say mipnei she, if I'm saying to a friend, I'm drinking water because I'm thirsty, and I say mipnei she, it sounds like your Hebrew teacher is talking, not you. It sounds a little old-fashioned. It sounds a little woody, it's a little stiff. Mipnei she just sounds very formal. One of the reasons why, and I put this asterisk here, any of you who've ever taken the bus in Israel, know that one of the many, many stickers at the front of the bus has this line that I put right here, Mipnei seva takum. And sometimes it has the rest of the line, V'hadalta pnei zaken. This is a line from the Torah, and it's a line that basically translates to upon or because of the elderly, you should rise. And the idea is you put this in the front seats of the bus to make it clear that the front seats of a bus are reserved for senior citizens. And so this line comes from the Tanakh to basically remind people, show respect to the elderly by not sitting in the seats designated for them. Mipnei has that connotation for people. So when they see mipnei she, they also think this is older, this is a little bit more stodgy, this isn't me. You can certainly use mipnei she. I will bet you if you're talking to a younger person or not necessarily just a younger person, they're going to look at you thinking you're speaking this very formal Hebrew to me and I'm your friend, like, calm down. So if you want to get into a fight with your Hebrew teacher, you can absolutely blame me for this. I am a biglal she person. I think mipnei she is very formal, but you do you, as you say. Just understand mipnei she is a little bit more formal. Okay?
Excuse me. I think on the bus, I think mipnei comes from panim. So in the face of, in front of zaken.
So you're correct, but
Not because of.
the exact same way, it filters into people's head that mipnei is very formal. But yes, you are right in how it's translated, but the reality, the real politic of the word is that it's this old-fashioned old word. But you're absolutely right in how it's translated. Okay, moving on. Mipnei, biglal she, you're going to hear these a lot. They all mean ki. Okay, and you see here exactly as we went through with ki, how to use these. Mipnei or biglal can be used independent or dependent variable, and if you use them an independent clause, and if you use it as an independent clause, it's followed by she. Ani shote mayim biglal she'ani tzameh, or ani shote mayim mipnei she'ani tzameh. Like right now. The next word, bishel. Bishel also means because or because of. This is a very formal word. This is a very formal word. I would suggest not using this in everyday conversation. This I would reserve for business correspondence by email or by text. This isn't a word I use on an everyday basis. It's a great word. It's really high-level Hebrew. But bishel is not everyday street Hebrew in the way that ki, mipnei, and biglal are, okay? But as you see, bishel is used only before a dependent clause. So bishel hageshem, because of the rain, or due to the rain, if you want to make it sound a little bit more upmarket, if due sounds like that to you. Two more that are very, I think are actually pretty high-level Hebrew, but you hear this in everyday conversation, which I do think is quite nice, is mekevan and mishum. Again, mekevan here in row 6 and mishum in row 7, used almost exactly the same way as mipnei and biglal. Mekevan or mekevan she, mishum or mishum she. Both of them mean because of. Again, they're higher level Hebrew. I hear people speaking like this all the time, regardless of age. Excuse me, and regardless to whom they're speaking, with whom they're speaking. Just know they all mean because. Every single one of these means because. We have a lot of words in Hebrew for because. What can I say? We like to explain why we do things to people and try to convince them perhaps, which is why we have all these, or for whatever reason. Okay, so all of these can be used for because. And then we have this last one, ho'il. Any one of you who've ever rented an apartment in Israel or ever had to sign a contract in Israel know this word, even if you never translate it. Ho'il. Ho'il is probably best translated as whereas, which is why I didn't write it out here, because ho'il you'll almost never see outside of a legal contract. Ho'il ve, as you see here, I put it's followed by an independent clause, and it's usually ve. So remember, if you look at the beginning of an apartment contract, it's got like anywhere from a few to several ho'il ve clauses. Whereas the renter agrees to blah, 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 right? Whereas, just like in any legal contract you've ever had to sign, ho'il is that word, is basically whereas. But whereas is just a fancy word for because. Because the renter has agreed to take on blah, 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 right? It's the same thing, just in legalese Hebrew, the word is ho'il. And that's what you'll see in all legal contracts, is this word ho'il. Don't use this in everyday conversation. You're going to sound really disconnected from people if you use ho'il ve in saying to someone. I would never say ho'il ve sameh ani shote mayim. That is just, that's not Hebrew. That's showing off. So don't do that. Okay? But just know this word you've probably seen a lot and you didn't know what it was, because otherwise, why would you use this outside of a legal context? Is just another synonym for all this. Okay, so all these words, what it comes down to is because is used a lot, just like in English, it's used a lot in Hebrew, and in Hebrew we have a variety of words that all basically mean this. There's just a slight difference in when you use one versus the other. Okay, I'm going to stop here as I see there's a couple questions in the chat, and then get to more questions. Just one second, let me open it up. If it'll let me open it up. It won't. Okay, just 1 second. There it is. Okay. Okay, does biglal have a negative connotation? Okay, none of these have judgment on them or quality on them, okay? Biglal, mitnei, none of them have a negative or a positive. They all just mean because of, due to, they don't mean something is, you're explaining something negative or positive. They all mean the same thing, but it's a good question. None of these have a positive or negative connotation or anything else. They're simply explaining why you're doing something, right? I'm drinking water. Why am I drinking water? I'm answering the why. It can be for, and I can use any of those words, almost any of those words to explain that without any positive, negative, or any connotation, but that's a great question. I learned that biglal is followed by a noun. So like I just said, right? Dependent clause versus independent clause. A dependent clause is usually a noun. It's almost always a noun. So if I want to say, this would be terrible English or terrible Hebrew also, I'm drinking because of thirst, right? Thirst is the noun. And so I wouldn't say biglal she, I would just say biglal simon. I would never say that. And hopefully none of you will ever say that, right? I'm drinking because of thirst. Who talks like that? I drink because I'm thirsty. That makes sense, right? And I'm thirsty is its own sentence, so it has to be followed by she. Okay? But biglal, exactly right. It could be followed by a very famous song from the 70s or 80s in Israel, biglal ruach, because of the wind. Okay? That's the name of the song, biglal ruach, or rak biglal ruach, just because of the wind. That's a independent, that is biglal followed by a dependent clause, haruach, the wind. Okay? That makes complete sense. Please spell thirsty, with pleasure. I'm writing this in the chat window in both Hebrew and transliterated Hebrew. Okay, let me just make sure that the Hebrew is on. Okay, sameh is thirsty. That's for male. Sme'ah with an aleph, with a hey at the end. Sme'ah with a hey at the end is for feminine. Sme'im, sme'ot. Okay, that's thirsty. Okay. I see there's a question on a different topic, which I'll definitely get to. Does anyone have any questions about because?
Usually, key is easiest to remember. That's
yes.
I can say. And then I won't make a mistake. Biglal is like tongue-tied, tongue twisting.
Like I said, key is, you're welcome to stick with key, but at the same time, Israeli native Hebrew speakers will not stick with key. So it's important to know all these other words.
No, I understand biglal, yeah. I don't think I'll use it much.
Okay, that's fine.
The phrase "lifnei seva takum" has always intrigued me, because, as you mentioned, the original Chumash interpretation is you get out of respect for an older person. But I think in the context of the bus, it means because you've got.
I think you got lost with the. But yes, you're right. In the context of the bus, it's get up out of the seat that's assigned for, that's designated for senior citizens. Okay.
Also, biglal gets conjugated. Biglal lech, biglali, biglala.
That's a great question. So yes, biglal, as opposed to all the other ones, it's a great point. Biglal can be conjugated. So I can say, instead of a whole clause afterwards, I can sum it up by referring directly to someone. So if I want to say, I missed the bus because of you, that of you will be, that biglal will conjugate. Now, again, you don't always talk like this. This is a little formal. Whenever we add possessive suffixes, you know, that I, cha, ach, o, a to the end of a word, it's a little bit formal. There are people who speak like this. It's perfectly all right. So if I wanted to say, I missed the bus because of you, and I'm speaking to a man, I would say, Fispasti et autobus, fispasti, I missed, et autobus, biglalcha. I missed the bus because of you. I'm not going to write out the whole conjugation because you can find this in dictionaries and in other places, but yes, biglal as opposed to all the other forms, and let me just open that up again. Biglal can be conjugated. So I can say, if I didn't want to say, if I want to say it's raining because of you, like I wanted to blame the other person I'm seeing for everything that happens to me in life, I could say that. Or anything else, if I wanted to say that because of you, because of me, because of him, because of her, biglal, here, this one can conjugate. All these other ones don't. If they do, it's very formal and very old Hebrew. Even saying biglalcha is very poetic Hebrew. You will hear this every once in a while in the news, but that's a really great point. If you're speaking about someone and there isn't a need to further explain it, you can just use biglal and conjugate it. That's a great point. Great. Other questions on because before I answer other questions?
Is it Bishelcha? Bishelcha?
No. At least not in modern Hebrew, we don't say that. Okay, so I see, let's go to non-because questions, or if you have any more, feel free to chime in. So someone asked at the beginning, uses the verb leshanot and leachlif. Okay, so let me write these out in Hebrew in the chat so you know what we're talking about. Leshanot, if I can get there. Leshanot, leachlif. Why aren't we typing? Leshanot. Sorry, לשנות, להחליף. Okay, so someone asked about the uses of the verbs, these two verbs, לשנות and להחליף. You can see the transliteration, they wrote it up there. Joyce wrote it up at the beginning of the group chat, so if you need to see how it looks in transliteration. Now, both of these could be translated as to change, but you'd be wrong. Lishanot means to change. Ani mishane kivun. I'm changing direction. Ani lishanot means to change. Okay? Lehachlif means to exchange. So to change something isn't necessarily dependent in English and in other languages. To change something isn't necessarily dependent on something being there to replace it. Right? I'm changing my opinion, or I'm changing my plans, or any of that, versus I'm exchanging, or I'm switching. Leachlif can mean to exchange, it can mean to switch, it can mean to flip. Anytime you're switching one thing with another is leachlif. Just changing in general is lishanot. That's the major difference between the two. So if I were, if I was going to change clothes when I go out later, I'm not going to use the verb I'm getting dressed because I'm already dressed. I'm going to use the verb ani machlif. I exchange, I'm switching. So machlif is the present tense conjugation for masculine. So ani machlif et hachultza. I am changing the shirt I'm wearing. Now, in English, I would say I'm changing, right? But it's clear I'm changing into another shirt. Now I'm changing, if I'm changing into something different, that's one thing. But if I'm changing my shirt, I'm exchanging it, I'm flipping it with something else, okay? Versus lishanot. Lishanot simply means to change. Shinui, the verbal noun of it, just means change. Whereas achlafa, which is the verbal noun of the ing of lachlif, achlafa means an exchange, like an exchange between two things. There's an understanding that even if the values of the two things are not equal, they're still meeting at the same place. The shanot is just to change. Okay. Hope that explained that. But yes, there is a difference. We use them just like in English. It's the difference between change and exchange. Other questions?
Hi, it's Miri. I have one in
Yes.
the chat. So if it's too formal to say biglalcha, what form of the pronoun do we use after biglal to sound more?
You can say that. No, that's a great question. You can say that. Biglalcha ani ichalti. Because of you, I was late. If you need to say that, by all means. You in everyday talk, yeah. If that's. I'm just trying to think of informal sentences that you would say, not use that. No, you would have to, but you could also explain it. If you didn't want to conjugate biglal, you would just further expand upon why it's because of you. It's the action that person did, right? So I'm late because you kept talking with me, or I'm late because you didn't answer me, right? I'm explaining a little bit more, and there I don't have to conjugate biglal. So if I want to say, I'm late because you kept talking, I was late because you kept talking, I would say, ani ichalti biglal she'imshachta ledaber. Instead of saying, ani ichalti biglalcha. It's just a slight difference between the two, but if you don't want to worry about conjugating, just explain a little bit more why that person did something or the result of it. It's a great question. Abigail asks if we have suggestions for future lessons. Contact Nefesh B'Nefesh. They're the ones who sent out the, you saw it on the RSVP for this event. You can just email them directly and it'll come to me as well. In front of with pronouns. Sheila, what do you mean? You can unmute yourself.
It's from here.
Okay.
In front of him, in front of you, in front of her, like that, in front of me.
What do you mean?
Well, they're using lifnei, and they're using another way of spelling it with two yuts, lifanai or something.
Okay, so lifnei is a very different word. That's not mipnei, but yeah.
I know, it means before. So, yes. Wait. I'll open it. In front of. Well, there's the word amul people use a lot. Mule. Mul.
Okay, great question.
So
okay.
That's what I know, but in here it's showing another way.
Okay, so I don't know what book you're using, but let me just explain a little bit. So a lot of words in Hebrew can be conjugated, and when I say conjugated, all we're doing is we're adding a suffix. The end suffix, remember, comes at the end of a word, and that either implies or not implies. It shows possession or it shows the object we're talking about. So, for example, belcha, because of you, right? Lefanecha, before you. Mulcha, in front of you. Yes. So we have lots of words like that that can be conjugated. They use that word conjugated loosely as that. Okay. Abigail asks, what is the word you use for being late? Okay, great questions. Let me write this in the chat. So in Hebrew, you've probably learned the word, the adjective, me'uchal. Me'uchal, me'uchal. Me'uchal means late, but it's late as in an adjective. And this gets conjugated just like all other, adjectives. So it's me'uchal is masculine, me'ucheret with a taf at the end, late feminine, me'ucharim, me'ucharot. Now we do have a verb, le'acher, and let me write that here. Le'acher, le'acher, le'acher. Le'acher means to be late. So if I was translating it, I was late. Ani ichalti. Ani ichalti, let me write that in here. Ani ichalti. Ani ichalti. Ani ichalti simply means I was late. It's just the verb that's related to the word milchal, or the adjective milchal. Okay, great word, obviously. Use it all the time in Hebrew. Most of the time we don't apologize because Israel Standard Time, we don't follow things like those of us from North America and Western Europe. But regardless, you do hear this. There's other words that we use in Hebrew for it. I'm not going to go into them, but just know that ichalti means I was late. Don't necessarily expect an apology to come before or after that word. Okay, but yeah, that's the word for late. Meuchal is the adjective. Ichalti or le'achel is the noun, is the verb, Meuchal is the adjective. Le'achel is the verb. I hear an L sound when you say that verb. Okay. So like in many languages in the world, the L and the R sounds get often mixed together, right? So I'm pronouncing it both with a slight sore throat because of the air conditioner, but also because I'm saying resh. Okay, so as you see here written in Hebrew, it's a resh. So if you can't say resh, I can say it without it. It's meuchar or ani icharti. Okay, just as I wrote in the transliteration and just as I wrote in the Hebrew, it's a resh. It is not a lamed. Hebrew has a very distinct difference between those two sounds. In modern Hebrew, it sounds like the French R. There are some people who still to this day speak it with a more trilled R. Modern Hebrew does not have the American R. And for many people, actually the American R is one of the hardest sounds to learn. It's actually the last sounds that native English speakers learn, which is why little kids often will sound like they're saying L or W, because it's a very hard sound. It's a very difficult sound to teach someone to make. It's also the reason why we have a lot of languages, particularly East Asian languages, that the L and the R, because of the way your tongue is used to make those sounds, actually sound very similar. So yes, it's ichalti with a resh, not ichalti. There is no such, there is a word that's not what we're talking about here. But great question. That's an important one to say. It's also, frankly, one of my ways of being very polite to my fellow Americans to say, don't bash people about the R sound because the American R is one of the hardest sounds in the world. It's one of the rarest sounds in the world, actually. We take it for granted because there's so many of us, but the American R is a very difficult sound. Sounds similar to the word for I'm in a rush. Can you mention the forms of it? I'm in a rush. That is I can hear why you think that sounds similar. So the word for to rush, and I'm going to write this in Hebrew as well in the chat. And okay, mimaher or mimaher means to be in a rush. Limaher is to rush or to hurry. So ani mimaher, I'm in a rush. I'm hurrying to get somewhere. It does sound like ani me'achil, I am late, but very different things, right? I'm in a rush versus I am late. One is before, one is after, one may have connection with the other, but they're two different things, okay? But yes, they do sound similar. They're grammatically, they're the same construct, but they have two different shorashim. Shorashim are the roots, those three letters. In the case of le'acher, of to be late, it's Aleph Chet Resh. In the case of Limahel, it's Mem He Resh. Okay, so slightly different, but they do sound somewhat similar, right? How do I say I'm lost or I lost my phone? Do that next week because that's actually a very long lesson because we have two verbs that mean to lose and they're the exact same shoresh, they're the exact same root, and you use them in different ways than you're probably taught to. So that's a great one for next week. We're going to do I'm lost or I lost my phone. I'm writing that down actually. Just cut and paste that one. Okay.
Is one of them like abadati? Abadati? Is that?
Oh, that's exactly right. You don't say that. Say avad li apelephone or ani badati. So yeah, it's a complicated one. We'll do that together. That's a good one. Copy. Okay. So lost phone. Recordings of this class, again, just the way that you RSVP'd to this through Nefesh B'Nefesh, just ask them and they'll send you the recording for the class by email. Okay, maybe next week also the word for lacking. Chaser. So we've gone through this before, but chaser is great. Chaser, just really quick. Chaser, let me write this in Hebrew. Chaser. Chaser means lacking, or you could translate in some ways absent, but it's more like lacking or not there. This does get conjugated, so chaser, chasera, chaserim, chaserot. And in this case, you're referring to the object. So chaser li ochel. Right? I'm lacking food. Chaser li ochel. Just like we had the other week about possession, this is sort of possessive, right? Something is not, I'm lacking something. So I don't have something. It's the same idea. Just because it's the negative, it's still possession. So chaser, let me write this out in Hebrew and transliteration. The line, and God willing, none of you are lacking food, but just so you know what it looks like, chaser li ochel. Out. Chaser li ochel. Shift. Chaser li ochel. Whoever shared their screen, could you please stop?
I don't know why that's happened.
Okay, well, can you please,
I don't know.
please stop.
We'll see.
Okay.
Oh.
Okay. As I wrote in the chat, chaser li ochel, right? As you see, chaser is referring to ochel. So what is absent? The food is absent. Li is where I fit into this. But otherwise, chaser gets conjugated based on what's missing or what's absent. So chaser li ochel, absent, literally, you could translate this as absent to me is food. But in proper English, we would say I'm lacking food. Okay? Chaser and ochel are conjugated. If the word I'm talking about is feminine, it would be chasera. If it was plural, chaserim, chaserot. Okay? But chaser is a great word. There's a lot of other words that are related to it. We can go through that as well next week because that's a great one. Okay, unless anyone has any last minute questions. Great. So I will see you all next week. Thank you for joining us. Again, if you have any other requests for any classes, please be in touch with Nefesh B'Nefesh. We'll work it out together, as well as if you'd like the recording of this, just be in touch with them by email. They'll get back to you immediately. Okay? Toda rabah. Thank you so much. Litrot. See you all soon.